The ring had been sitting in my pocket for 3 weeks before that night, pressed against the fabric every time I sat down, a small, constant weight against my thigh, like a secret heartbeat I could feel but no one else could see. I had rehearsed the proposal 100 different ways in the shower, on my commute, while cooking dinner in the apartment we shared but never called ours out loud. I thought I was waiting for the perfect moment. Now it feels more like the moment was waiting for me. It started with little things. Her phone face down on the table during dinner. The quiet buzz, the quick glance, the half-smile she tried to bury in her glass of wine. At first, it didn't feel like a threat. It just felt like distance. A tiny step backward in a room that was already too big for the two of us. We had always been the couple who lingered at the table long after the plates were empty, talking about nothing and everything. But lately, dinner had become a series of small, efficient movements. Fork to plate, glass to lips, eyes to phone. Her laughter had moved somewhere else to someone else, and all that was left at our table was the clink of cutlery and the low hum of traffic outside the window. I told myself it was work. That's what she said when I finally asked. "It's just the project," she murmured, rubbing her temples, the way she did when she wanted the conversation to end without actually saying so. "We're under pressure, that's all. You know how it is." And I did know how it was. I knew about deadlines and late emails. I also knew what it looked like when someone was with you in the room but not really there. The proposal plan became a way to fight back against that feeling, a private rebellion against the growing silence. If I could just get us back to that spark, to that laugh that used to live in her chest and spill out easily, maybe the distance would shrink again. So I booked a rooftop bar her best friend had recommended, the kind of place with soft amber lights and city views that made everything below look small and manageable. I ordered the ring months earlier, choosing a simple band with a single stone, nothing flashy, just honest. That was how I thought of us. The party invitation came in the middle of all this, like an afterthought that turned into a turning point. My best friend Daniel was hosting a celebration. New job, new promotion, new title printed beneath his name on a polished glass door. I'd known him since high school. He'd been there for every version of me. The awkward kid with second-hand shoes, the broke college student sharing instant noodles, the nervous guy on his first date with her. He had been a witness to my life, a sort of unofficial brother. "Bring her," he'd said over the phone, his voice bright and tired at the same time. "Both of you need to come. I want the people who matter there." The people who matter, the phrase lodged in my mind. It made me think of the ring again, of the silent dinners, of the rooftop reservations sitting in my email like a promise I hadn't delivered yet. The night of the party, the city felt damp and restless. The rain had stopped a few hours earlier, but the streets still glistened under the street lamps, reflecting headlights and blurred neon signs. Our apartment smelled like her perfume and the faint, bitter trace of burnt toast from breakfast. She stepped out of the bedroom in a dark green dress I'd never seen before, the color pulling the light toward her, making her look both familiar and distant. "How do I look?" she asked, spinning once, the fabric brushing against her thighs. For a moment everything else faded. "You look," I swallowed, the word perfect catching on something inside my chest. "You look beautiful." She smiled, but only with her mouth. Her eyes seemed elsewhere, already halfway to the party, or halfway to a place I hadn't been invited. The drive to Daniel's place was quiet. The wipers brushed away the leftover drizzle in slow, rhythmic arcs. She scrolled her phone, the screen lighting up her face in pulses. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and one over the ring in my pocket, feeling its outline through the denim, tracing the circle like it might somehow anchor me. Daniel's apartment was on the top floor of a new building, the kind that smelled faintly of fresh paint and ambition. Music spilled into the hallway even before the elevator doors opened, low, warm, and crowded with bass. Inside, the air was thick with perfume, cologne, and the sweet heaviness of something baking in the oven. People laughed too loudly, gestured too widely. Glasses clinked every few seconds. Daniel saw us almost immediately, his arms opening wide, his grin familiar and comforting. "There he is," he shouted over the music, pulling me into a tight hug. Then he turned to her, and something in his posture changed. Softer somehow. "Wow, you look incredible," he said, and she flushed in a way she hadn't when I'd said the same thing. It was small, a tiny, almost invisible crack in the night. But once you hear something break, you can't pretend it's still whole. The evening unfolded in fragments. Drinks passed from hand to hand. Someone put on an old playlist we'd all shared in college. People shouted along to choruses, bodies moving in that loose, unself-conscious way that only appears around familiar faces and free alcohol. I drifted from conversation to conversation, always aware of where she was, tracking her presence the way you follow a scent or a shadow. At first, she stayed close. Her hand brushed mine when we moved through the crowd. She laughed at the right jokes, leaned into me when someone took a group photo. But as the night stretched, the distance that had been growing over the last few months seemed to seep into the room too. I lost track of her for a few minutes while I was cornered by an old colleague of Daniel's, a guy who insisted on telling me about his crypto portfolio and how everything in life was about timing. I nodded at the appropriate moments, my attention split between his words and the quiet alarm in my chest. When I finally excused myself, I checked the kitchen, the balcony, the hallway outside the bathroom. Nothing. It was the kind of absence that doesn't feel neutral. It feels charged, heavy, as if the space itself is holding its breath. I found them in a side room at the end of the hallway, the door half closed like a secret that hadn't decided whether to stay hidden or be caught. The room was dim, lit only by a floor lamp in the corner and the glow of the city through a narrow window. Through the crack in the door, I saw her first, her back against the wall, her hands tangled in his hair. Daniel's face pressed against hers, their silhouettes fused into a single, unmistakable shape. Everything inside me went quiet. No rage, no shouting, just a sudden, dense silence, like the world had been wrapped in thick cotton. I watched for longer than I want to admit, long enough to see that this wasn't a mistake or a misread gesture, long enough to know this had happened before, that their bodies moved with a familiarity that didn't belong to two people crossing a line for the first time. The ring in my pocket felt heavier than it ever had. My fingers closed around it so tightly that the metal edge bit into my palm. I thought of the rooftop bar, the amber lights. The way I had imagined her eyes would fill with tears for all the right reasons. Instead, I was standing in a borrowed hallway, watching my fiancée make out with my best friend as if I had been edited out of my own life. A laugh from the living room broke through the silence, muffled and distant. Someone turned the music up. The bass thumped against the walls, a steady, indifferent heartbeat. I pushed the door open. They didn't hear it at first. They were too wrapped up in each other, in their own small universe. It wasn't until the hinges creaked softly that they pulled apart, breathless, cheeks flushed, lips swollen. Her eyes found mine, and in that second, 3 months of late-night texts and early-morning excuses fell into place. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice cracking around the words. "Wait, this isn't." Daniel straightened, his expression sliding from desire to horror in a slow, visible shift. "Man, I didn't answer. My hand moved on its own, sliding into my pocket, pulling the ring out into the dim light. It looked smaller out here, just a circle of metal that suddenly meant nothing and everything at once. I stepped forward, the carpet soft under my shoes, the air thick with the scent of their shared breath. Her hand reached out as if she could pull the moment back, rewind it to an earlier version where things could still be fixed. The ring slipped from my fingers. It hit the floor with a dull, final sound, rolling in a small, uncertain circle before settling near her feet. No speech, no ultimatum, no dramatic declaration. I just turned around and walked out of the room, past the faces in the living room that blurred into anonymous shapes, past the music and the laughter and the clinking glasses. Out into the hallway, into the elevator, into the wet night air that smelled like rain and exhaust and something ending. I didn't look back, but as the elevator doors slid shut, I heard her voice calling my name from somewhere down the hall. Small, cracked, distant. I pressed the button for the ground floor and stared at my empty hand, the faint red mark on my palm where the ring had been. The doors closed on her voice, on the party, on the life I thought I was walking toward. Outside, the rain started again, soft at first, then harder. I stood under the awning for a long time, watching the water streak down the glass, listening to the distant echo of music through the building's walls, feeling the first cold threads of a question I wasn't ready to face yet. What do you do when the future you built in your head dies in a single, quiet second? I didn't have an answer, so I stepped out into the rain and let it soak through my shirt, my hair, my skin. Each drop felt like a small, insistent apology from a sky that didn't know any better. By the time I reached my car, my clothes clung to me like a second, heavier skin. I sat in the driver's seat, water dripping onto the steering wheel, breath clouding the windshield. The city lights blurred behind the rain-smeared glass, turning everything outside into streaks of color and motion. My phone vibrated once. Then again, I didn't look at it. I just stared at the empty passenger seat beside me, at the faint impression in the fabric where she had been sitting only hours earlier. An empty chair in a quiet car, in a city that didn't care about one man's broken night. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed to life. The wipers dragged across the glass, clearing a narrow slice of vision ahead. I drove into the rain, away from the party, away from the ring on the carpet of a room that used to feel safe. The road stretched out in front of me, slick and reflective, carrying me toward a future I hadn't planned for. Behind me, in a dim side room at the end of a hallway, a small circle of metal lay still on the floor, catching just enough light to prove it was still there. And somewhere between the party and the apartment, between the man I had been and the man I was becoming. A single, quiet thought lodged itself in my chest and refused to move. If this is the end of us, what does that make of me? The question sat there, heavy and unanswered, as the rain kept falling and the city lights flickered past like ghosts. Sleep became something that happened to other people. For the first few nights, it was just me, the ceiling, and the ticking of the kitchen clock bleeding faintly through the bedroom door. I would lie on my back, eyes open, staring into the gray space above me as if the plaster might rearrange itself into an explanation. It never did. The bed felt bigger without her, but not in a way that felt like freedom. It felt like a stage where one actor had walked off in the middle of a scene, leaving the other one to improvise lines that no longer made sense. Her side of the mattress still held the faint dip of her body. The pillow carried the ghost of her shampoo, that soft, floral scent that once meant home and now meant something like nausea. On the second night, I stripped the bed and washed everything. Sheets, pillowcases, the blanket she loved to cocoon herself in on cold mornings. The washing machine hummed and rattled like it was working through something too, and for a moment I leaned against it, eyes closed, pretending that spinning could also scrub out memory. It didn't, it just made the apartment smell like detergent and damp cotton. Her things were still everywhere. A pair of earrings on the bathroom counter, her mug chipped at the rim in the sink. A half-empty bottle of her favorite red wine on the kitchen shelf, its open top dark and silent. Every object seemed to point at a version of her that belonged to me, even as I couldn't unsee the version of her pressed against a wall in Daniel's arms. Daniel, thinking his name felt like biting down on something sharp. I'd known him for almost 15 years. We'd shared everything from cheap beers to secrets we promised never to repeat. He was the one who helped me move into this apartment. We'd carried the couch up 3 flights of stairs, cursing and laughing, promising to never live above ground level again. The couch was there now, silent and still, as if it had witnessed all of this and decided neutrality was the safest choice. The messages started the same night I left the party, first from her. "Please pick up. Where are you? Let me explain." The word explain made something twist inside me. There are things you can explain, traffic, delays, bad moods. There are other things that don't need explanations because the image speaks louder than any words. Her back against the wall, his hands on her waist, their mouths meeting like it had happened 100 times before. Then came Daniel's messages. "Man, I'm so sorry. I was drunk, I swear it didn't mean." I stopped reading after that. I didn't need his version of the story. I had already watched it unfold. Work, oddly enough, became a kind of shelter. The open-plan office, with its buzzing fluorescent lights and low, constant chatter, felt like a place where my life could pretend to be normal. Emails needed answers. Clients needed updates. Deadlines didn't pause for heartbreak. I sat at my desk, fingers moving across the keyboard, saying all the right professional things while my mind replayed the wrong personal ones. At lunch, my coworker Naomi leaned over the partition between our desks. "You look like hell," she said bluntly, but there was concern in her eyes. "Rough weekend." I hesitated. The story was still too raw, too unfinished, to offer up as casual breakroom conversation. "Yeah," I said finally, something like that. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "If you need to step out or something, I can cover your emails," she said, no questions asked. There was a kindness in that, help without curiosity, support without demands for the messy details. I almost told her. Almost opened my mouth and said, "My fiancée made out with my best friend at a party," and I dropped the ring on the floor and walked out into the rain like a cliché. But the words stuck. They felt too big, too dramatic, like they belonged in someone else's story, not mine. At home, the night stretched. I started leaving the TV on for background noise, not really watching anything. News anchors moved their mouths silently as I muted the sound, letting the flickering light push back the darkness in the living room. Sometimes I would fall asleep on the couch, waking up at 3 a.m. with a sore neck and the remote still in my hand. Her calls kept coming, different times, different lengths, always the same name on the screen. On the 5th night, around midnight, the buzzing finally stopped being something I could ignore. I stared at the phone as it lit up the coffee table, her name glowing against the dark. My thumb hovered over the answer button, shaking just enough to betray how much I still cared. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned the phone off completely and sat there in the silence that followed, feeling both powerful and deeply, deeply alone. The traces of the affair started to show up in small ways. A slip of a receipt in the pocket of her coat hanging by the door, a bar across town we'd never been to together. A rideshare notification that popped up once on the shared tablet, time-stamped late at night, starting from our apartment and ending near Daniel's neighborhood. Nothing explosive, nothing cinematic, just a series of tiny, damning details that turned maybe into of course. One afternoon, while looking for an old charger in the drawer by the TV, I found a photo tucked between some cables and manuals. It was printed, not digital, which somehow made it feel more deliberate. Her, Daniel, standing too close at a work event I hadn't attended, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Their smiles were wide and easy, unburdened by guilt or consequence. I sat on the floor, the photo resting on my knee, and felt something in me finally shift, not explode, just shift. Until then, the pain had been a wild, uncontrollable thing, flaring and crashing whenever it wanted. But in that quiet moment, with the afternoon light slanting in through the blinds and dust motes drifting lazily in the air, the grief began to organize itself into something else. Not acceptance, not yet, but a kind of clarity. This wasn't a mistake at a party. This was a pattern, a choice repeated enough times to become a habit. I thought about the ring on the floor again, about walking away without saying a word. Part of me wondered if I should have stayed and listened, collected explanations like evidence, lined up reasons for and against saving what we had. Another part of me was quietly proud of the silence, of the way my legs had carried me out of that room before my mouth had the chance to betray my own dignity. Days blurred into each other. Work, couch, cold leftovers eaten over the sink, showers that ran too hot and too long, as if heat could peel the past off my skin. On the 7th day after the party, there was a knock at the door. It was late, close to 9. The sky outside the living room window had already faded into that deep, heavy blue that made the city lights look sharper, almost aggressive. I froze halfway between the kitchen and the couch, a fork still in my hand. The knock came again, soft, careful, familiar. I knew it was her, the way you know the shape of someone's breathing in the dark. For a second, I considered pretending I wasn't home, turning off the TV, sitting in the dark, holding my breath until she gave up and went away. But the apartment was already lit, and the thin slice of hallway visible through the peephole wouldn't lie. I put the fork down, my heart beating in my throat, and walked to the door. The closer I got, the more the apartment seemed to shrink, the walls pulling in, the air thickening with everything unsaid. Her shadow shifted on the other side of the door. She knocked once more, her knuckles barely grazing the wood this time, like she was apologizing even in the way she asked to be let in. I stood there, my hand hovering over the doorknob, caught between two versions of myself, the one who had bought a ring and booked a rooftop, and the one who had watched that ring spin on the floor of another man's apartment. When I finally turned the handle and opened the door, the hallway light spilled in around her, outlining her like a photograph developed in reverse, bright edges, dark center. Her eyes were red, her cheeks were damp. Her shoulders were hunched inward, as if she were trying to take up less space in the world. She opened her mouth to speak, and for a heartbeat, all the anger and hurt inside me rushed to the surface, colliding with the part of me that still remembered the way her laugh sounded on Sunday mornings, when everything felt possible and nothing had broken yet. What came out of her mouth next would decide which version of me survived this. "Can I come in?" she asked. It wasn't the apology I'd expected, not a flood of explanations or excuses. Just 4 small words that landed between us like a fragile object we both pretended not to see. For a moment, I considered saying no, closing the door gently, walking back to my cooling dinner, letting the silence do what words couldn't. But I stepped aside instead, the movement automatic, ingrained from 100 other nights when she'd come home late from work and I'd simply made space for her. She walked past me into the apartment, her perfume arriving a second after she did. The same scent that had lived in these rooms for months now, threading itself into the furniture and fabrics. It smelled different tonight, sharper somehow, cut through with the salt of dried tears. The apartment looked strange with her in it again, as if I had been living on a set, and the missing lead actor had suddenly returned. Her eyes took in the small changes, the stripped bed visible through the half-open bedroom door, the stack of dishes in the sink, the open bottle of whiskey on the counter with only a few inches gone. She turned back to me, wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold. "I've been calling," she said softly. "I know," I replied. Silence settled between us, thick and heavy. The TV murmured in the background, some show I wasn't truly watching, laugh track echoing faintly like a cruel joke in the wrong room. I reached for the remote and switched it off, plunging us into a quieter, more honest kind of discomfort. "I don't even know where to start," she whispered. There it was, that familiar helplessness that used to make me want to fix things for her, to smooth out her rough days, to hold her up when the world felt too heavy. This time, though, I let the feeling pass. "Start anywhere," I said, "if there's a story you think makes any of this clearer." She flinched at this, like the word itself had weight. Her eyes filled and she blinked rapidly, tears gathering but not yet falling. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier than I expected. "I'm not going to lie to you," she began. "It wasn't the first time." The admission was a blow I'd already braced for, but hearing it out loud still knocked the air out of me. I leaned back against the arm of the couch, fingers gripping the fabric until my knuckles ached. "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calm, almost detached, like I was interviewing someone for a job that would never exist. "About 3 months," she said. The number matched the subtle shift I'd felt in our dinners, in her laughter, in the way her phone had become an extra limb. Each syllable was a small shovelful of dirt on the coffin of the life I thought we were building. "Why is him?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. I wasn't sure which part hurt more, that it was anyone at all, or that it was him specifically. She sank onto the edge of the armchair across from me, the one she used to curl up in with a book on Sunday afternoons. Tonight she perched on it like a guest, her back straight, her feet planted on the floor. "I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm blaming you," she said, "and I swear I'm not." My chest tightened. "Try anyway." She looked at her hands, turning the thin silver band on her finger, the one we'd bought together months ago, a promise ring before the real one, the ring I had meant to replace. "I felt unseen," she said finally. "Not unloved, just like we were going through the motions. Work, dinner, sleep, repeat. I kept waiting for something to change, and it didn't. Then one night after a work thing, Daniel walked me home and he just listened, really listened. And I felt noticed." The words cut not because they were cruel, but because they were honest in a way I hadn't anticipated. There was no villainous monologue, no dramatic confession of reckless passion. Just quiet loneliness cracking open in the wrong direction. "You could have told me you felt that way," I said. "I would have listened too." Her eyes finally met mine, glossy and desperate. "I tried," she replied. "Little comments, small hints. I didn't want to sound needy or ungrateful. You were always tired, stressed. I kept telling myself it was just a phase." "So you turned to him instead," I said, the bitterness there before I could smooth it out. "Yes," she said. She didn't pull back from the word, didn't dress it up, just held it between us. "Yes, I did." There was something disarming about her refusal to hide behind excuses. It made it both easier and harder to sit there and listen. "What about him?" I asked. The words tasted sour. "What does he say about all of this?" She winced. He's ashamed," she said. "He told me to give you space, said he'd accept whatever you decide. He knows he destroyed something important." I laughed once, a short, humorless sound. "Something important," I repeated. That's one way to describe our entire friendship. A muscle in her jaw tightened. "You have every right to hate us," she said quietly. "I hate myself most days, to be honest." Her voice cracked on those last words, and a tear finally slipped free, carving a clean line down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I don't want you to hate yourself," I said, surprising myself as much as her. I wish you'd made a different choice before we got here." She nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "So do I," she whispered. Silence again. Not empty this time, but crowded with memories, with grief, with all the versions of our life that would never exist now. "I keep thinking about the ring," she said suddenly. Her eyes dropped to the floor, as if she could see it there between us. "How it sounded when it hit the carpet. I still hear it at night." "So do I admitted. It was supposed to mean one thing. It ended up meaning something else entirely." Her shoulders shook once, a small, contained sob. "I found it after you left," she said. "I picked it up and just held it for a long time." "Keep it," I said automatically, then shook my head. "No, actually no, I don't want you to keep it. I don't want it either." She looked up, startled. "What will you do with it?" I stared past her, at the dim outline of the kitchen, at the window where a few stray raindrops still clung to the glass. "I don't know yet," I said. "Maybe nothing. Maybe something symbolic and dramatic. Or maybe I'll just put it in a drawer and forget about it until one day I find it and it doesn't hurt anymore." A faint, painful almost smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "You're allowed to be dramatic," she said. "If anyone's earned that, it's you." The remark softened something sharp inside me, just a little, enough to let the next question out. "What do you want?" I asked. "Not what you think you should say. Not what will make you look better. Just, honestly, what do you want from me now?" She inhaled slowly, as if breathing the question in before answering it. "I want a chance to fix this," she said. Her voice shook, but the words were clear. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I've ruined your trust. But I still love you. And I hate that the last version of us you remember is that hallway." The word love hung in the air, heavy and complicated. Once it had felt simple, hands intertwined on a park bench, shared jokes, sleepy Sunday mornings. Now it felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. "I don't know if I can come back from this," I said. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you and not see that room, him, you, together." Her face crumpled, but she nodded. I understand, she said. I'm not asking you to decide tonight, or tomorrow, or ever if you can't. I just needed you to hear me say that I am sorry, and that what we had mattered to me, even when I was too selfish and confused to act like it. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet that followed, each second stretching the moment thinner. Time still moved, even when everything else felt stuck. Do you remember that morning? I said slowly, when the power went out and we ate breakfast by candlelight because we couldn't use the stove. She frowned, then nodded, a small light flickering behind her eyes. You burned the toast, she said softly. We had cold cereal and coffee made on that camping stove you insisted on buying. We sat on the floor, I continued, backs against the cabinets. And you said that even if everything else fell apart, you'd still want mornings like that with me. Tears spilled down her cheeks now, steady and unchecked. I meant it, she whispered. I did. I just lost track of it somewhere along the way. I believed her, that was the hardest part. I believed she had meant it. I believed she was sorry. And I believed that none of that erased what she had done. I don't know who I am in this story anymore, I said quietly. The guy who forgives, the guy who walks away, the guy who pretends this never happened and spends the rest of his life flinching every time his partner's phone buzzes. She looked at me like she wanted to cross the room, to take my hand, to collapse the distance between us by force of habit. But she stayed where she was. For once, she respected a boundary without being asked. I can't answer that for you, she said. I wish I could. I wish I could rewrite this whole thing. But I can't. We sat there separated by a coffee table and the wreckage of our choices. The city murmured outside, cars passing, distant sirens wailing, someone's laughter drifting up from the street below. Life went on out there. In here, everything felt paused. Finally, she stood. Her knees wobbled slightly, as if she'd been sitting in one position for too long. I'll go, she said. I needed to see you. To say I'm sorry to your face, not through a screen. She walked to the door, then hesitated, her hand hovering over the knob. Will you let me know when you've decided? She asked without turning around. About us. The word us felt foreign in my mouth now, like a language I used to speak fluently but had forgotten. I'll let you know, I said. It was the only honest promise I could make. She nodded once, shoulders trembling, then opened the door. The hallway light spilled in again, outlining her figure just like it had when she arrived. For a heartbeat, I saw her as she used to be on nights like this, coming home late, tired but smiling, dropping her bag on the floor, kicking off her shoes. Tonight, she stepped out instead of in. The door closed softly behind her, the latch clicking with a finality that echoed louder than any slammed door. I stood alone in the quiet apartment, the air still vibrating with her absence. The chair where she'd sat, the faint damp patches on the armrest where her tears had fallen, the lingering trace of her perfume, all of it testified that she had been here, that this conversation had been real. I didn't cry. The tears had come in small, scattered bits over the past week, unexpected and uncontrolled. Tonight, there was just a strange, hollow calm. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Rain had started again, tapping softly against the glass. The streetlights painted the wet pavement in streaks of gold. Somewhere down there, she was walking away. Somewhere across town, he was probably staring at his own ceiling, wrestling with his own ghosts. Behind me, the apartment waited. The bed, the couch, the kitchen chair where she used to sit, leg tucked beneath her. I wrapped my arms around myself and leaned my forehead against the cool glass. For the first time since the party, the question shifted. Not, how could they do this to me? But what do I do now? The answer didn't come. Not yet. All I had was the sound of rain, the muted glow of the streetlights, and the slowly dawning realization that whatever decision I made, it would change more than just my relationship. It would change the way I saw myself. The night stretched on, quiet and heavy. Somewhere between one raindrop and the next, exhaustion finally pulled at me. I turned away from the window and walked toward the bedroom, each step feeling like it belonged to a different version of me than the one that had stood in that hallway watching a ring fall. I lay down on the stripped bed and stared at the ceiling again. The same view, a different man. Sleep came slowly, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. Just before it took me, in that hazy space between waking and dream, one thought floated to the surface. Forgiveness and reunion aren't the same thing. The thought lingered there, fragile but insistent, as the room dissolved into darkness. Morning arrived gently, without drama. No blaring alarm, no urgent messages. Just a soft gray light pushing its way through the curtains, painting the room in muted shades of almost blue. For the first time in days, I woke up without that sharp, immediate stab of panic. The events of the past week didn't crash over me all at once. They came slowly, like a tide creeping up the shore, inevitable but less violent. The apartment was quiet. Not the suffocating kind of quiet that had filled it the night after the party. This was different, lighter somehow, as if something had shifted in the dark while I slept. I made coffee on autopilot. The familiar smell filled the kitchen, wrapping itself around me like a memory of simpler mornings. Mug in hand, I moved to the small table by the window and sat down, watching the city ease itself into the day. Cars rolled past, headlights still on in the dim light. A couple hurried down the sidewalk, their breath visible in the cool air, hands clasped. A dog tugged eagerly at its leash, dragging its sleepy owner along. Life unbothered by the drama of one apartment on the third floor. Her visit the night before replayed in my mind in pieces. Her red eyes, the tremor in her voice, the honesty in her admission. The way she had stood at the door, asking not for a verdict but for time. In another story, maybe that would have been the point where we decided to fight for us, to go to therapy, to set rules and boundaries and promises layered on promises, to rebuild brick by painful brick. But as I sat there in the gray morning light, fingers wrapped around a warm mug, something in me felt done, not angry. Not even broken in the way it had been a few days ago, just finished. I thought about forgiveness. The word had always seemed simple before binary. You either forgave or you didn't. Now it felt more like a spectrum. You could forgive and stay, you could forgive and leave, or you could carry the wound like a badge, refusing forgiveness and letting it define you. I didn't want to be defined by this, by them. The thought was small but steady. It didn't flare up. It didn't demand, it just sat there, solid and quiet, like a stone in the palm of my hand. I picked up my phone. There were no new messages, but the old ones were still there, stacked and waiting. Hers, his. Each notification a doorway to a conversation I hadn't had. I didn't open them. Instead, I created a new message. Her name at the top, a blank space below, waiting. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard as the words arranged themselves in my head. No accusations, no dramatic flourishes, just honesty. It's taken me time to realize this, I typed slowly, but I'm not the person who can come back from what happened. I believe you're sorry, I believe we loved each other, but I can't build a future on this kind of fracture. I'm letting you go. I hope you find healing. I'm going to try to do the same. I read it over twice. It wasn't perfect. It didn't capture every nuance, every tear, every sleepless night, but it was true. My finger hovered over send. For a second, I imagined other versions of this message. Ones where I said, let's try. Or I need time, but don't go too far. Or we can fix this. But the quiet in the room, the weight of the last week, and the steady, unfamiliar calm in my chest all pointed in the same direction. I pressed send. The message left with a small whoosh, a mundane sound for such a profound shift. I sat there, phone in hand, expecting to feel immediate regret. Instead, I felt space, not joy, not relief in any triumphant sense. Just a subtle loosening, like my ribs had been squeezed and someone had finally let go. Next, I opened a new conversation, this one with a different name, Daniel. My chest tightened again, but not as violently as before. This was a wound of a different kind. Brotherhood, trust, history. The cursor blinked, patient and indifferent. You were my best friend, I wrote. That doesn't disappear overnight, no matter what happened. But what you did crossed a line I didn't think you were capable of crossing. I'm not ready to talk. I don't know if I ever will be. For now, I need distance. Please respect that and don't contact me again. I sent it before I could overthink it. The phone buzzed a few minutes later, her first 3 short messages. Okay. I understand. I'm sorry, and I hope one day you find someone who never makes you feel this way again. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. There was grace in her reply that I hadn't expected. Maybe that was her first real act of love in a long time, letting me go without argument. Another buzz, this time from him. I get it, I'm sorry. I'll back off. Not enough to undo anything, too much to ignore entirely. I turned the phone off and set it face down on the table. The morning moved on. I showered, letting the hot water run over my shoulders, my neck, my closed eyes. Steam filled the small bathroom, fogging the mirror. When I wiped a hand across the glass, my reflection stared back tired, a little hollow, but somehow more grounded. I dressed slowly, choosing clothes not for work or anyone else but for myself. Comfortable, clean, unremarkable. In the living room, the sunlight had shifted, warming the floorboards near the window. The city hum grew louder as more people filled the streets. I opened the window a crack, letting in the cool air, the sound of distant traffic, the faint smell of rain-soaked concrete. Empty rooms used to feel like a threat, proof that I was alone. Today, they felt like blank pages. Not a promise exactly, just possibility. I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the mattress. Her side still dipped slightly. I ran my hand over the indentation, then drew it back, as if touching it might pull me back into something I had just walked away from. There was a small box in the top drawer of the bedside table. The ring, She had slipped it under the door 2 days after the party, in a quiet envelope with no note. I hadn't opened it then. I open it now. The ring sat in the center of the box, catching the light. It still looked the way it had when I first held it in my hand at the jewelry store, simple, honest, hopeful. The object hadn't changed, only the story around it had. I turned it over between my fingers, feeling the smooth metal against my skin. There were 100 dramatic things I could do with it. Throw it into a river, drop it from a rooftop, sell it and take a trip somewhere far away. Instead, I closed the box and placed it back in the drawer, not as a keepsake of pain, not as a symbol of lost love, just as something that existed, a chapter that had been written. A part of me that I didn't need to destroy in order to move on. I didn't need grand gestures. What I needed, I realized, was something quieter. Forgiveness, not as a gift to her or him, but as a release for myself. Not forgetting. Not excusing, just refusing to carry their choices like a weight that determined my worth. Late in the afternoon, the clouds began to part. Thin streaks of blue appeared between the gray, and the light in the apartment shifted again, from muted to soft golden. Morning light might be release, but late daylight felt like a gentle reminder that time moves forward whether you're ready or not. I made another cup of coffee and returned to the window. This time, I opened it wider. The air that came in was cool and smelled faintly of damp earth and car exhaust. It wasn't fresh in the way movies romanticize, but it was real, honest. My phone stayed off on the table. There was nothing on it I needed right now. I thought about future mornings, ones where this week would be a story told in past tense, not an open wound. Maybe I'd tell it to someone one day, maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I'd just carry it quietly, as a scar that didn't define me but reminded me of what I'd survived. I leaned my shoulder against the window frame and let my eyes close for a moment. The sounds of the city rose up to meet me. Voices, engines, a distant dog barking, someone's music playing faintly through their open window. I exhaled slowly. Letting go, I realized, wasn't a single act. It wasn't dropping a ring or sending a message or closing a door. It was a series of small choices, repeated over and over. To not check her social media, to not replay the scene in that hallway again and again, to not use this hurt as a measuring stick for every person who came after. It was choosing, moment by moment, to step away from the fire instead of feeding it. The light shifted once more, softer now, stretching shadows across the floor. Somewhere down the line, there would be another party, another crowded room, another night with music and laughter and someone's hand in mine. It might not look like what I had planned. It might be quieter, but it would be mine. For now, it was enough to stand here, in this small apartment, with the window open and the city breathing in and out around me. To know that the worst had happened and I was still here. I took a sip of my coffee. It had cooled a little, but it was still good. Outside, a patch of sunlight broke through the clouds and landed on the street below, catching the wet pavement and making it shine. The kind of small, ordinary beauty that's easy to miss when your heart is busy breaking. I watched it for a long time, and in that quiet, ordinary moment, with the taste of coffee on my tongue and the hum of the city in my ears, the future stopped feeling like an empty space left behind by someone else's departure. It started to feel, very softly, like something new I hadn't met yet. Someone else's departure. It started to feel, very softly, like something new I hadn't met yet.